Welcome to Ask the Expert from Triangular Consulting. My name is Roy Pellicano, and I will be your expert for the day. Today we're going to be talking about CIO strategy for the pandemic and how you can maximize the opportunity that the pandemic has presented you in order to demonstrate the value of IT, to demonstrate the value of your leadership, and to demonstrate why the CIO is so important to an organization. Every CIO has a unique opportunity to radically impact their organization during this crisis. That's going to be the case for any expert or any CEO or any executive at this time, but the CIO in particular has the ability to demonstrate their value. You've seen hopefully the steps that we're putting out. There's going to be 10 steps that a CIO can take. We will be releasing a couple of white papers on this as well, which will provide you with some additional information. But today I wanted to talk about one particular slide that we are not covering in detail. And really what it does is it looks at two separate continuums. So you have a continuum that is about viability and a continuum that is about risk. You'll see it on the slide right next to me here. The viability is probably the one that is more difficult to understand as CIOs and even as executives. If you're a CEO listening to this, risk is something that we generally understand. It's really the likelihood of a threat occurring and the impact that it's going to have. And like any continuums, you have one end of the continuum and the other. In this case, it's low and high. And you're not going to be always at the low, you're not always going to be at the high, you're going to be somewhere in between or along this continuum. The one that I really want to discuss is viability, because that has multiple connotations and is particularly difficult to understand just from a slide. So if we think about viability, what makes a business viable? What we're really talking about is the ability for it to survive, or in particular the ability for it to thrive. So we want to make sure that as we're looking at the business and we're making recommendations for how IT can help the business, or whether the business should even stay in business, is tied to its viability. Now, just because a business is low viability on the spectrum doesn't mean that in the future it will not be higher on the viability, right? So something that's not viable today might be viable tomorrow, and something that is viable today may not be viable in the future. So we need to be able to understand what makes something viable and what makes something not viable, or low and high on the continuum. Once we've identified that, and that's specific to every organization, it changes with the current business environment. It's not an easy thing to get, but it's like that old saying, you know it once you see it. It's easy to understand, it's easy to visualize, but what's important is articulating that it's necessary to explore and necessary to understand. So when we're looking at viability, there are multiple things we want to discuss. In particular, when it comes to viability, it is whether the organization is going to be able to survive and be able to conduct its business successfully. We want to look at resources and which resources are necessary in order to make something viable. We need to take a look at its assets. You need to take a look at the relationships that the organization has. One of the benefits of IT is that we can, in IT and with technology, we can make things happen faster. We're a leverage. We're a lever to make things happen at a multiplier effect. And we need to understand what those resources are that make our business viable or not. And that, again, is why a CIO can be so valuable to the organization at this time, because our discipline looks at how technology marries with the organization. So just to quickly wrap up, you've got the four quadrants across the two different continuums. You've got the risk and the viability, and depending on where you are in the organization, or sorry, depending on where you are in that graph, will allow you to identify what steps you should take. I won't go into those details. That's why you have the slide. This has been Roy Pellicano for Triangular Consulting's Ask the Expert. Thank you very much. Ciao.